HR AfterWorkers. Welcome in this 14th webinar proposed by Munich HR AfterWork. I am Marie, one of the two organizers with our dear Sushma, who is also connected tonight. And we are glad to kickstart this panel discussion that will be hosted by two insightful speakers. We have Putri Realita, who is the Global Head of Diversity and Inclusion at Danone, a global food and drinks company operating in more than 55 countries and employing around 100,000 employees worldwide, better in this way. During the past years, she has driven Danone's progress to become Equilab's top 10 gender equality French companies, and she also allowed Danone to be ranked 26 on the top 100 gender equality global companies in 2021. So she will obviously tell us more about this in a couple of minutes. And we also have Rachel Scheel, who is presently the SVP for Global Diversity, Equity and Inclusion at Criteo, a fast-moving media advertising technology company. So something to know about Rachel is that she actually started during the COVID pandemic. So she was telling us just a minute ago that she finally were able to meet her colleagues for the very first time last week. And she was actually, prior to this role, a global head of culture, engagement and inclusion for GE Healthcare. And she has over 20 years of experience in HR leadership, talent, and organizational change. So as I was saying before, make sure to turn on your camera because it's always better to speak to people. And as we want the session to be fully interactive, it's actually going to be better, I guess, for everyone. As described in our various communications, the concept today is quite simple. The first segment of the panel discussion will be about answering to questions that we selected based on your feedback on the survey we launched in August regarding your expectations and the topics you wanted to cover. And also one or two questions that Putri and Rachel had close to their hearts and wanted to talk about to introduce the topic of diversity and inclusion. And of course, the second half of the webinar will be giving the floor back to you. If you have any additional questions you want to ask our panelists, if you also want to share a best practice, get some learnings exchanged from the entire pool of participants that we have tonight, it will really give back the floor to all of you. So without further ado, enjoy your time with us tonight. And Putri, Rachel, I'm very pleased to introduce the panel discussion with the first question we came up with. So Putri, I will actually give you the floor first. Is inclusion to be considered a byproduct of diversity? Why are we emphasizing it so much?
Yes. Can you hear me?
Yes, very well.
So hello, everyone. Thank you so much, Marie, for inviting me to these discussions. Looking forward to discuss this really trending topics at the moment about diversity and inclusion. I remember 5 years ago when I started this role at Danone, and it was a new role for Danone back then. And it was, I mean, for European-based companies, there were not many companies that are having this full-time job or full-time roles in charge of D&I. And at that time, it was really, I seek a lot of references from companies outside Danone and mostly are US-based, which are, I guess they were starting their journey much earlier than most of the European-based companies. So it's very interesting the question of inclusion, because for me, diversity is like, there are many companies are defining diversity as those characteristics that are more than the visible characteristics like gender, age, nationality, but also the invisible one, like different points of view, different thoughts, and etc. So, and I think that nowadays companies are having diversity and inclusion together And I think what I learned before when I started this role, it was those companies are we call diversity, only diversity without inclusion. And I think more and more companies are using the terms inclusion more because we believe that diversity without inclusion is not working, because you can have a lot of differences on the table, but without the ability to make these differences work together, then there is no added values for diversity to be there. So if you have diverse people in the meeting rooms, but you don't hear their voices, or you don't take into account their ideas, their different perspectives, then there is no point of having diversity in the room in the first place. So that's also why diversity has to be followed by inclusion all the time. And what's the second question?
It was, why do we emphasize indeed next to diversity?
Okay, yes. So and diversity can be driven by company policies, like you can put a target, like we want to have gender parity by this year, for example, or you want to have people of color by this year. But inclusion is really delivered through individuals, each individual in the company that needs to take decision every single day to act inclusive with all the differences that we have surrounding us. And it's not easy to measure as well. And I think the measurements part, I think we will talk about it later, because it's more intangible than in diversity, because diversity also you can measure, especially for gender, which is measurable across the different countries with the same kind of measurement. Also, there are other types of diversity that only can be measured legally in certain countries, but not in the other countries. So in terms of measurement, there are also things needs to be looked at as well. So, and I think there is a very easy word of saying the difference between diversity and inclusion. It was the sentence coming from the head of D&I for Netflix, and I think it has been used by also by many practitioners. So diversity is like inviting people to a party, and inclusion is making them dance together. So if you invite people to a party and not asking them to dance together, then what's the point of having them in the party, right? So I guess that's what I can say about inclusion and diversity.
Thank you so much, Putri. Rachel, would you have anything you would like to add?
Yeah, look, I just echo everything Putri said. I think inclusion is the cultural side. And one of the things that I've seen in our DEI efforts is when you really talk about inclusion, everybody can buy into it, because sometimes you talk to a manager or a leader and, they really struggle with, how do I get more diversity? Because it means I either have to create vacancies in my team, or something has to move or shift, and it doesn't feel immediate. And to Putri's point, you can only measure so many aspects of diversity. So gender globally, in the US, ethnicity. So it becomes very hard to become visible. But when you talk to people about, and I love that, diversity is invited to the party, inclusion is being asked to dance. And then I go even further, belonging is dancing like no one's watching. It's that psychological safety of, I no longer have to leave who I am at the door. I can be myself at work. I can be my true self. And that actually means I can be my best self. You're going to get the best of me because you know who I am. You know what drives me. I can challenge without consequence. I'm cared about, and I feel connected to everything the company's doing because I feel a part of it. My voice matters and I'm involved. That's the power of inclusion. And when that happens, you naturally bring out diversity. It becomes a part of the bigger picture.
I love it, Rachel. Thank you so much to the two of you. So I guess it helps us to get closer to the topic that we want to discuss about tonight. And the next contextual question that I would actually have for the two of you is, is COVID-19 having an impact on diversity and inclusion? What kind of impacts have you actually experienced yourself?
I'm happy to go first, Putri, if you want.
Yeah,
yep.
Please do so.
So there is quite a lot of research that shows that particularly females have struggled through COVID, those with caring responsibilities or parental responsibilities. And I've even talked to a lot of friends or colleagues who, you know, have really struggled as a female, because it's well known that females often take, no matter if they're in a balanced working relationship, they take that primary caring responsibility on their shoulders. And they felt challenged by, how do you balance homeschooling, or, you know, the restrictions around COVID, and finding that balance with working from home, or even being kicked out of the study because their male counterpart needs the study for their office work. And so where do they work? They work from the kitchen or the lounge or the bedroom. And there's a lot of evidence to show that women are either opting out of careers or opting downwards from their careers, in particularly over the last 18 months. I think the other big area is, you know, if we think about sexuality, you know, when you're in the office, it's sometimes a little bit more comfortable to come out. When you're having social interaction with your colleagues, you can feel a little bit more comfortable talking about your partner or, you know, your personal life. But on this square, it becomes quite tactical. And so what we're seeing or hearing is there's a whole, you know, group of people who've maybe started with a new company or joined a new team who don't feel as comfortable expressing that side of themselves and who they are and what makes them, you know, what makes them valuable. And I guess the third area that I think is really important is where I come back to belonging, where you walk into an office and you have a coffee conversation, you get off a call or you come out of a meeting and your mood is on your face and somebody picks it up and says, oh, that went well, or you look really upset, let's talk about it. You don't get those in the moment opportunities sitting at home isolated. And, you know, when you're clicking on a Zoom call and clicking off a Zoom call and clicking on a Zoom call, you know, who's reading your mood and your body language, and who's checking in on you to say, how are you? And that connection to the company and the culture and the people and that camaraderie and that community feeling is so important. And there's a huge element of that that's been lost over the last 18 months that we as organizations need to focus on. How do we do that differently now? Because we're not going to go back to 5 days in an office. The reality is it's all changed.
No, thank you. Putri, what would you like to add on the top of it?
Yes, I think there are two additional things that I would like to add. The first one is COVID has changed expectations of employees towards leadership. So I think that the definition of leadership has shifted a lot during COVID. And here, because I think a lot of people are experiencing working from home, and during the first lockdowns periods, the first important thing or the first expectation towards the leaders is empathy and care and listening. And those probably are not the qualities that are seen before COVID. I mean, it's seen, but it's less seen than before COVID. So I think during COVID situation, there are this shift of mindset of what is leadership, what is important of being a leader. And it was also a test for all the leaders around the world, how they can continue to engage their teams in that situations. And I think the second one is also expectations towards talents. Two companies also are changing, and because of the flexible working, and I think more and more people and talents, they are expecting companies to be much more flexible in terms of the ways of working, and I think the notion of having to be in the office like Rachel said, 5 days a week will not be the case anymore in the future. And also, like, for example, position has to be based in one location. This probably will change because people can be based anywhere in the world at the moment. So I think that companies need to adjust, to adapt to this new mechanism or new ways of working and thinking, and become evolving as well in terms of our policies and how to adapt to the needs of the future talents.
Oh, it's very interesting, Rachel, Putri, to see how much this topic of diversity and inclusion is echoing the different conversation that is happening in the different HR functions, like recruitment, the new ways of working, indeed, talent management. Indeed, it's almost like it's making diversity and inclusion an HR topic to the fullest. Maybe it wasn't that case before, or it's an extra question, actually, that is not in our list, I know.
Yeah, I think more and more I've seen diversity, equity, inclusion become a business priority and agenda item. If I think about my early career, you know, it was always on my priorities to have, you know, good representation, but I owned it from a HR manager, HR business partner perspective. And, you know, I'd do everything I could to influence, you know, my leaders to own this, but it felt like it was a tick. It sounds terrible, but it felt like it was a HR tick box. Mm-hmm. Whereas, and this is why I moved into this space, because I saw it become a bigger part of the business agenda, and that leaders were really seeing the value that this created. And I think particularly Black Lives Matter in the last 18 months, some of the, you know, a lot of the issues around ethnicity have been lifted, you know, to the surface globally. You know, the conversation around intersectionality is more and more prevalent, and privilege. It's really getting people to stand up and think about, you know, I might be white, but how can I help this cause, and what's my, you know, where can I play a role to be a stronger ally for others? But then how does my privilege become more supportive when it comes to allyship?
And actually, it's the perfect transition, Rachel, to the next question, because talking about the business agenda, what do you think should be on your diversity and inclusion agenda moving forward, like next year, for instance?
I can answer first if you like. So I, you know, and again, I'm new to Criteo, so this is all kind of building this out for Criteo. You know, for me, it's more than just who we hire. It's got to go through the entire ecosystem of the employee experience, from hiring, developing, onboarding, training, promotion, support internally, the experience I have with teams, organizational change. I could keep going. But then even beyond that, it's the socially responsible thing to do. It's how we partner with clients. It's how we're seen externally. It's how we maybe work with suppliers, and what are we doing to ensure that we're always thinking about diversity and inclusion in how we operate as a business, so that it's not just about how many females are on the board or in the CEO staff. It's more about, you look through the organization and you feel it, you see it and you feel it on a day-to-day basis.
Thank you, Rachel. Putri, what would you respond to this question? And I was referring to some of the certifications you recently got for Danone. I guess it would be interesting to hear, why do we need certifications basically in diversity and inclusion? What is the purpose behind?
Well, I guess nowadays, if you are a public listed companies, there are more and more requirements from like the ESG requirements to report some data publicly, and there are more and more requirements to report diversity data. So not only gender nowadays, they are also requiring pay gap, for example. They're also requiring to report, now even more and more, they're requiring ethnicity / racial data. So I guess if you are working for a multinationals and it's public listed, this will be the kind of the future that the investors are asking from you. So that's why the certification is necessary for such companies. And I think for Danone, for example, we have put our 2025 roadmaps or strategy, and it is a triangle approach. So of course we always start with people, and as Rachel said, people means not only the representations, KPIs, but also the inclusion, how you make inclusion happens every day in all the teams around the world. How do you make inclusion and diversity relevant for our business units in Japan or our business units in Morocco, for example? So we do have a global KPIs, a global strategy, a global roadmap, but we also have local KPIs, which are driven by our local teams and the local leadership teams, which are locally relevant for their local businesses. So I guess it's a matter of making D&I relevant for everybody. And in addition to the local KPIs, we also have functional KPIs. And KPIs for functional, for example, like finance, for finance would be different than for HR. Because if you see HR functions, it's very more woman dominated than, for example, like functions like IT or operations or sales, where we can really make a difference there. So there is functional, there is also local, and also at the global level, it's how we are measuring the things that we can measure globally, like gender, for example, and gender pay gap, and as well as inclusion. So I think that, and also the people part, that's the people part. And then we also, as Danone, because Danone is an FMCG company, and people know our products in the market, our brands in the market, and our brands can really build a change in the society, and changing conversations, challenging stereotypes in that particular society. So the next, the second element of the triangle is the brands part. How I work with marketeers to make sure that our marketeers are as diverse as the consumers as well in our local markets, but also they understand about unconscious bias and how this can impact how they communicate to the consumers through their advertising, through their communication materials. So that's the brands part. And then the third element is partners. And partners means that as Danone, and we are public listed, and we have brands and we have operations in 55 countries, and we can also impact the community. And community means that we can help women, for example, in the community to thrive. We can fund women entrepreneurs, for example. So we basically work with our partners to be able to build also some KPIs on that. For example, we have a Danone ecosystem fund where we have every year we measure how many funds that we use for women to empower women around the world. And for example, we have Danone Nations Cup. So this is an initiative. It's like a football competition for kids aged 11 to 13 years old. And how it works is that normally we have competitions, local competitions in the countries, so all over the world. And then the winners will go to somewhere. We will pick a city. I mean, before COVID, we have this, and now we are thinking to change the game. But we were targeting to have, for example, like girls, because this age is very crucial to have gender equality mindset. So, and then we also asked the kids. It was very, very interesting that we asked the kids of the Sustainable Development Goals, which one do you think is the most urgent to tackle? And these kids answered mostly gender equality. And therefore we, together with our partners, we aim to have 50-50 girls and boys team by 2022, for example. So this kind of thing that falls under the partnership part.
Thank you, Putri. Indeed, it's interesting to like take a step back and for us to understand that diversity and inclusion is not only inside the company and with the direct employees, it's actually broader, and it also touches our customers and consumers. So a very, very important point indeed. I would like actually to pause with the discussions between the three of us for the moment and to give you all the possibility to unmute yourself. Of course, I have the chat available very easily. So if you also want to publish your questions, feel free to do so. We can probably stop here for just a second, reflect back on what Putri and Rachel told us about diversity and inclusion, and this inclusion piece, this belonging piece even, about the impacts of COVID-19, the agenda for diversity and inclusion moving forward. Do you have actually any question or best practice or tips to share with all of us? Do not be shy. There is no, nothing will be recorded, I promise. Well, it will be recorded, but yes, Lorraine, let us know.
Hi, everyone. I have a question because, so I heard that you talked about KPIs, and I'm wondering, outside of just KPIs, what are concrete actions that you can take in a global company that will impact the diversity and inclusion of the company, but like really concrete? Because in the company that I work in, it's mostly about sessions that a few people attend, but I'm wondering what actions that can have a major impact can be taken for big global companies.
So I mean, again, I've got two different experiences. I've worked for a big global company of, GE is a large organization, and the arm I led was GE Healthcare, which was 55,000 employees. And then you've got Criteo, which is under 3,000 employees. But I come back to the fact that with DEI, and sorry, my 5-year-old's just come home, so you're going to hear noise. My biggest philosophy is you have a global strategy, but it has to be locally relevant and able to be locally applied, because it does look different depending on where you sit in the world. And whether you're looking at, gender is fairly universal, but when you're looking at sexuality, ethnicity, there are different ways that, as a company, you want to be inclusive on those particular topics, even, in some respects, disability. So for me, KPIs are great. And there's a lot of research that companies that go out there and say, I want to increase females by X%, and they just have those KPIs, don't actually shift the needle, because what they're not doing is they're not going deeper in the organization to really drive change. And that comes back to what we talked about starting. It's got to be cultural. Awareness and understanding and really opening people's eyes is super critical. When Black Lives Matter happened last year, we stood up as an organization and said, okay, well, what can we do to ensure that we support our employees in the US and those who are affected by it outside of the US? But also, this is an opportunity for us to do something different and drive real awareness and understanding and appreciation of some of the experiences that we may not have grown up with or ever seen in our lives. Like, again, I grew up in Australia, which is a multicultural country, Indigenous background, but the area I grew up in was very white, and very kind of homegrown. I kind of call it homegrown Australian, like very outback kind of sort of style. And so it is about, how do I then educate myself to learn from others to build those experiences? So I think there's a big piece around, I like to focus on learning, mentoring, sponsorship. They just create so many opportunities for people to become more aware and more inclusive. And it starts to, I think Putri said as well, it becomes more individual. How do I take ownership on this subject? And how do I make one small change that can help shift the culture of the organization? So I don't know if that answers your question, but I think, you know, it's quite a broad topic, and there's, you know, it is really about sparking that change, that eye-opening moment.
All right, thank you.
Yes, I can add to Rachel. So if you ask about global, concretely, what we can do, I think the first one is to create policies, and these policies, like for example, like parental policy. So at Danone, for example, we launched parental leave, gender neutral parental leave, that the gender neutral that can be used both by men and women. And it applies globally. We implement it globally, and it took us 3 years to implement this policy really in all the countries where we operate. And then it helped to change the mindset where men are taking also the leave, the primary caregivers leave, which is the 18 weeks leave. And secondly, it's training. So training. Train the leaders, and I think in training, it's not enough just to do training, but how to assess our leaders with their inclusive behavior. So in Danone, for example, we put inclusive leadership as one of the 5 key leadership competencies that all leaders need to have. So they are automatically trained, and not only trained, but they are assessed as part of their performance, that they need to display these behaviors every day. And the third one that we can concretely do globally
Sorry,
is...
how do you display this?
Sorry?
How do you assess inclusivity in leaders?
It's from the feedback of the teams. So there's a 360 degrees feedback every year for all the leaders with the teams. And they assess their leaders based on these 5 leadership competencies. And the third one is to make it part of their social performance bonus. So really to make progress, that people need to feel that they own or they are accountable for this topic, and not only just me at the headquarter, and also maybe also the local D&I leaders, for example. Everybody needs to be feeling that they own the topic, they are accountable. So therefore, this KPIs, it needs to be relevant for them. So, and we make it relevant for them. For example, that's what I mentioned before about really split it into. So first, having a great and accurate data is so important. So you have your data and how the data contributes to the global set of data. So for example, give the functional, for example, the operations board, which only has, I don't know, I forgot the numbers, like 19% of women directors in their teams. Make it part of their accountability to improve it to, I don't know, 25, for example, by 2 years. And also not only about the diversity, but also the inclusion part. Make sure that everybody in their team are trained, and make sure that everybody is, the assessment results are the numbers. I mean, is on the effort that we would like them to be. So I think putting in place this governance, this set of criteria inside the company is important. And I think that also the important thing that, like Rachel mentioned, is that make it relevant for people, so that people feel that they own it. It's also my responsibility to do it. And for example, another concrete things that we do is we know that training sometimes it's only lasts for 1 hour training, and then people forget. Then at the end of the year they will be assessed, right? So we implement this. We call it D&I contact. So D&I contact is done every 5 to 10 minutes at the beginning of leadership meetings. they do D&I contact. And D&I contact can be an eye-opening conversations. It can be for example, in our executive committee, we started there. So we shared the KPIs, but also some nice videos and talking about bias. And okay, I experienced this in my way, or on my way home. I listened to the radio, and continue the conversations to be brought into the table when you are not talking about the numbers of the profit, but you also talk about how leaders are really accountable, and they feel like they own the topic, and they are responsible to bring a more inclusive environment.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
I hope that helps.
It does, it really does. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, this is Ishita. I have a question, if I may.
Yes.
Okay, I'm sort of going to go down into the basics with this question. You know, when you talk about diversity matrix, have you not found it challenging to gather data? Because when let's look at regions. Yes, I think the US is quite evolved in terms of sharing and making data available. APAC, I think, is rather open about sharing information. And then when I say information, it's more, it's focused on diversity topics. It gets really culturally sensitive when you ask or try and collect data in the Middle Eastern region. Yeah, and of course, the EU has its own set of GDPR and such things. Yeah, where make collection of data, or even if you are able to collect data, making that public in terms of on your dashboard or something, or reporting, gets really challenging. Have you as an organization been able to bridge that gap? And if yes, how was that possible?
I'm smiling, Ishita, because it is something I'm quite keen to explore and do at Criteo. And I have seen it done in the past, but it has to be done with absolute sensitivity and care. It's, and again, you're right, there are lots of different cultural, some legal elements that need to be taken into consideration, and of course GDPR and all of that. So there are organizations who do it. I think it's Google or Adobe who actually publish it on their website. So it's generally done through a voluntary style survey, but again, it's not something I can just send out. I mean, things like I cannot have access to what Rachel Scheel answered is incredibly important. It has to be voluntary. There has to be certain consents. It can't be broken down to a certain level. And then even as far as how you ask the questions is, super, sensitive. And there are a lot of third parties who manage this for organization, and the best way to do it is to go through a strong third party. I think, Putri, you might have done this, because a lot of companies do it through a certification. But it starts to measure more than just representation as well. It starts to look at things like intersectionality, and also maybe how the females in the organization versus the males in the organization feel about the inclusive culture, and what are some of the nuances that come out from that data. And so that's where, it becomes more than just a topic of how many males versus females, or how many people might be gay, straight, bi, trans, for example. It's more about how do those people in the organization, in those groups, feel that the culture is inclusive, that they can be their true self. So it is something that can be done, but again, it is something that needs to be done with partnership with your legal team and privacy teams. Hang on. Went down a different air pocket. Okay. It needs to be done with good communication. I'm going to lose my voice, so I might pass over to Putri.
Indeed, Rachel, and then we can come back to you.
Thank you, Rachel. But that was quite a bit of a response that I did expect, and thank you for sharing. Thank you.
Putri, what would you add to this question, actually, from your point of view?
Yeah, I agree with what Rachel, what everything what Rachel said. And in addition to that, I use Kantar Inclusion Index. So Kantar is also helping companies to do inclusion index, and inclusion index is an inclusion specific surveys. So we'll ask questions, not like an overall people survey. It's focused on inclusion. And in the survey, you can self-declare. So there are questions being asked like your ethnicity, your age, etc. So, but of course, it's voluntary. So, like Rachel said, and when we launch it we did launch the survey globally, and we had really a long discussion with the legal team, and there are some wording, some questions that we had to remove for certain countries. But I think we can in overall we can get an overall data of what minorities, in terms of what minorities of ethnicity, ethnic minorities feel about inclusion in Danone, and also about people with disability, and with also different sexual orientation. So those survey also can put work as well to be part of your self identifications campaign, but at the same time asking them about inclusion.
I might connect with you separately, Putri, as I start to research who to work with.
Yes, sure.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you for your question, Ishita. So I saw that we have four very interesting questions in the chat. Before we go to them, let's maybe stay on the data for just a second more. So we were talking about data collection, but one of the questions we know that a lot of people are asking is, which KPIs do you actually use in diversity and inclusion? Which of them are truly giving you the information that you need to build up your strategy and to implement the relevant programs?
So I'll start, because we're still building our KPIs, given DEI is a new function. And I think, one of the things I'm very hesitant to do is to say, we need to have X% female, because I think that, and there's a question in the chat around, it drives a quota, and it can drive bad behaviors and obviously create huge risk. So, I've very loosely, some of our terms are where we want to increase female representation in our tech function. So it demonstrates that there's a focus towards that, but I'm not going to give an exact percentage. I think where the KPIs that I've worked with in the past are things like, pay parity. That's a very easy, simple one. And we announced that in March. We want to sustain pay parity. We want to see that our, X% of our senior leadership roles have a female pipeline. That doesn't say that you have to hire a female, but each role should have a female in the pipeline. And again, it's about creating that space. And I think another question was around, diversity of shortlists. Again, you don't want to create these quotas, but we should have diversity on our recruitment pipeline. So when we go to market for particular roles, we shouldn't just accept the first 3 candidates that are the top candidates and they're all white male. We should be saying, okay, well, how do we attract a more diverse slate of candidates so that we can make the best decision possible for the team? And in doing that, you're creating more opportunities, rather than saying I have to hire a female, or the last 2 people in the process have to be a female and a male, and I'm using gender. It's more about what feeds the processes that come through. And then again, you can look at things like attrition and retention, like how many females get promoted versus males, how many exit versus males, like what's the ratios there.
Oh, that's interesting. Pablo, would you like to unmute yourself and let us know if it answers your questions or if you have any others.
Well, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Well, first of all, thank you, Rachel, for the feedback. For me, when I'm thinking, also I have another question related with quotas. How would you suggest, when we're thinking about quotas, how can we define which quotas? For instance, if we're talking about gender equality, if we're talking about disabilities, and also disabilities is a very broad and extensive, let's say, topic, right? We have the visible ones, the invisible ones, LGBT, and also, let's say, ethnicity, race. And also, what are your thoughts about how to discuss, because we're working in different countries, how is the best approach to talk about the different intersectionalities, especially in some countries, the topic of ethnicity can be challenging. How would you suggest to talk about that?
So you absolutely can talk about it. You know, you can raise discussions. I think Putri mentioned, you know, building awareness through training. We bring in a lot of external speakers, or we have internal fireside chat kind of panels like this, where we, you know, again, we had a really good marriage roundtable for Pride Month with our internal Pride community, who talked about, in each of their different respective locations, some of the challenges they faced being a gay couple and trying to get married, have children, etc. So you can talk about it, you can't report on it. Mm-hmm. So you can't say, unless it's to the point earlier, you're going down the path of finding a way to do a voluntary survey, which you know is voluntary. You're only going to get X% of your population completing it. You know, and it's not identifiable. But there's nothing to stop you from building that awareness piece. I think on the hiring piece, I know a lot of companies, we don't do it today, but we are exploring it. Gather information at that early hiring stage. What gender do you identify with? Do you identify as somebody with a disability? And you can then do some analysis on your hiring, which says how many people with a disability applied for the role but fell out through the process. And then that can start to give you an idea of, is your process creating barriers, and is it turning candidates away? So there's things you can do to measure that doesn't drive that end quota, but starts to look at what are the things that might be preventing you from getting an increase in diversity. And I guess yes, the argument, I think the other thing is having diverse panels in the interview process. Mm-hmm. So don't have people interviewing people like them, you know, thinking very broadly around who can we engage in the interview process as a part of that selection.
Putri, you wanted to add something, I think.
Yes. So it's I think that it's about both putting in place a systematic approach to change the processes, starting from hiring, from talent development, and until if somebody leaving, so to really track what people say during these processes. And for example, on top of these diverse panel interviews, we also put in place, we call it guardian angel in talent reviews meetings. So we have normally in talent reviews, those are when conversations are a lot of the time they are biased, and there it needs to be there has to be a person, we call it guardian angel, who challenge these biased comments, so that conversation there in the meeting is really based on evidence and not based on personal judgment of someone's characters. So there are, for example, like mobility, and there are a lot of discussions when people discuss about woman talent. Immediately the topic of mobility came up, but she is not mobile, so to grow into the next level, she needs to do another role in another country, for example, or in another city, and therefore we cannot promote her, for example. And then the guardian angel will say, well, why do we now talk about mobility? And before we discussed about male talent, and we didn't talk about mobility. So when we implement this guardian angel, this was really changing the conversations, and it took much longer conversation and discussions in the meeting, and people were telling me that it could be painful, but they really feel the difference, that they are really being made aware of their own biases, and sometimes you just don't realize, and sometimes if you put people always in the criteria that we are looking for, that would be really helpful. And another thing is about the hiring process. And so in Danone, for example, we are now developing a new training for hiring managers, where we say it has to be, when we recruit people, it has to be performance-based recruitment instead of profile-based recruitment. Mm-hmm. So many times when hiring managers have vacancies and they already think about the profile of people who will fill the positions. Oh yeah, the person needs to be having 25 years experience of whatever. So to really come outside of this profile-based hiring, we are now moving into a really give training to people on how to build the right job descriptions, and job descriptions which has much less and less, this kind of 25 years things, or educated in certain universities. So it will automatically considers diverse talents. So because you are focusing on the specific competencies and what kind of performance that you expect that this person or this role will deliver in the next 2 years, and what kind of skills that will contribute to this performance, so that people are moving from profile-based hiring to performance/skills-based hiring. And I'm not saying that this is easy, but it's really changing the mindset of how people think about recruiting, and I think this is the game changer going forward.
There's even a best practice. I was going to say, there's even a best practice now where you share the interview questions before the interview. You take away the fear of the process, because if you think about someone with a disability or somebody who has a disadvantage of some sorts, that interview process can make or break them, and you're making a judgment on one session. And so this is something I really want to implement, is we break down the process to make it more accessible and fairer. Sorry, I thought I just came on that topic.
It's an interesting approach, actually, Rachel. And it makes me think about Lauren's remark in the chat. She was actually rebounding on what you said earlier regarding like asking a couple of questions to the new joiner in the recruitment process. And she was afraid that it might make people feel that, we might use the information against them at one point.
Yeah, and again, I think, Lauren, it's a good question. It's the way and how it's asked. So it should be not part of the application, but a separate link that is almost like a data collection survey, which again, you can opt in or opt out of. It's purely voluntary, but it enables you to kind of do that tracking of where that application goes in the process. But the hiring manager and talent acquisition, for example, wouldn't have access to that data. It would be for pure analysis purposes only.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. So I'm actually going to move upward onto the questions in the chat, because I felt like the first ones we received were really broad and could be a very good way to conclude the session. So now I have the question from Eva. So she was wondering if this gender equality is still the main focus of companies' diversity management.
I think yes. It's always going to be a main focus until we get gender equality, until you can see, you know, people are having a conversation about a female and her mobility, or having a conversation, or excluding a female in the conversation because she's on parental leave or pregnant. I saw this article, and again, being an Australian, I follow Australia-New Zealand news, where a New Zealand politician said the day that we're fearful of hiring men because they're going to take time out of work because of parental leave is the day we're starting to reach pure gender equality. Mm-hmm. And that I thought was super powerful, because the amount of times people are saying, oh, look, you know, if I hire this person and she's pregnant, I've got to replace her in 6 or 12 months' time, you know. And again, some of those conversations don't even happen. They're made without the conversation. You know, I've seen people restructuring out part-time positions because they're forced to take a head count, and it's easier to take out the one that has the least amount of hours. But generally, that's your female employees. And so all those little and I could share so many more, but it is the one area we can absolutely measure today because we're legally allowed to measure it. And it's the one area where we have so much disparity.
Yes, and because it's half of the world population as well. So, yeah. So it will continue to be the focus of companies and countries to push gender equality, and we are not yet there. So if you look at CEOs, number of women CEOs, even in the executive committee, and I think the quota that has been put by governments, different governments around the world, that also has helped a lot in terms of how many percent of women that companies need to have in their boards, for example, and gender pay gap, like in Iceland, one of the most advanced countries, I guess. And yeah, so I think that policies from the government can really help companies also progress in this topic.
Thank you. So let's have a look at the question that we got earlier from Andrea, for instance. So she was basically talking about someone taking the job, I guess, with the role of making the company more diverse and having an inclusive culture. And she was wondering what would be the first things to do and what should be the no-go. How would you start, basically, if this is a completely new topic for the company? I am assuming.
I mean, I guess in a way, some of the personal experience, the first thing absolutely to do is to talk to people, get to know the culture, get a baseline of where you are today, understand the leadership mindset around this topic. Do they see this as a critical agenda item, or do they see this as something that somebody else owns? And who in the company is passionate about it, and where do we go to from here? I think this is such a big topic. You can just kind of boil the ocean with it. There's just so much you can do. And it's really about, again, getting that baseline, finding the strengths, but also the clear gaps, and then being very focused about what are the steps that you're going to take, and not rushing into just something to deliver something. It's about, does the company understand? Are they all aligned? Are we all pointing together towards the same direction? And do we know what we all want to achieve together? And that comes down to communication, culture, awareness, understanding, and governance, like having the frameworks, the foundations that kind of, drive that North Star.
Yeah, I think listening sessions would be the first thing to do. And listening sessions to people, different levels, different countries, different functions. and have a test of where they are, and also crunching data. So whatever data that the company has, where they are in terms of gender, in terms of other topics that they are measuring. And then I guess a no-go is to make it an only top-down thing. So you need to involve the people. I think that it needs to be seen as authentic and involve your people bottom up. I think bottom up movement, bottom up approach works very well. And don't make it top down. But of course, you have to get your CEO, the most senior person's kind of biggest support. And he or she needs to really want to drive change, and it's not only change on the surface, but a real change. And that's you need to get the real directions. And if there's no direction, you can drive it. You can drive it as it is. But it needs to be not only on the surface. It needs to be deep down into the system.
Thank you, Putri. Thank you, Rachel. So I saw two very interesting questions popping up, and then I will go back to the question from Aurélien and to the question from Eva, to the second one. So for instance, Celine was saying that in a way, can we consider that each single person is as an individual could fit pretty much in a diverse group, thanks to gender, age, thoughts, and why should we focus on categorization for KPIs? And would it be possible to ask everyone if he or she feels included by his manager? Could we like narrow down this diversity and inclusion topic to this level?
So this is what's called an inclusion index. And we introduced that in June this year after I started, and I had a lot of success with GE in implementing and driving this. So absolutely, we ask questions that, and I think Putri, you kind of mentioned it as well, it's all the behavioral feelings like, do I feel safe to be myself at work and challenge without consequence? Does someone care about me as a person? Am I involved in decisions, and is my voice heard? Do I feel included as a part of the team? And that's kind of it kind of ties to a survey that's, you know, we often have a 5-point rating scale. And based on the answers of those questions, you get an overall company inclusion index, but you can also break it down by team. So the power here is then you have a conversation at the team level to look at where the team has strengths and where the team has areas to drive improvement. And you can talk to the team around, okay, well, I'm hearing that people don't feel their voices are heard in meetings. So let's talk about how we operate as a team in meetings, and how do we drive, you know, that respect for each other. And that is super powerful. I think it's where you see, you know, coming back to the first question around where inclusion drives diversity, because everyone can take ownership for that, no matter who you are in the organization. You can see what your team inclusion score is, and you can say, okay, well, I have a part to play in this.
Putri, anything to add?
Yes, we are also, so this is inclusion index, and of course we are using this as part of the KPIs. So this is one of the inclusion KPIs that we use. And Rachel just mentioned it, so it really makes how to make team leaders accountable for their results. And because the results can be broken down into countries, into functions, so we make it part of the leaders' KPIs to improve the score. So that's how it works.
So, well, to rebound basically on this leadership accountability and what we said about the ownership of our employees around those topics, makes them concerned personally about what's happening and give them a voice, being heard exactly about their personal experiences. We had Aurélien who was actually asking, how can we explain and share the diversity strategy back to the employees to give them some sort of a federation?
I think it's just being very transparent. Where are we today? Where do we want to, what are we focusing on? Where do we need their help? You know, I think where this goes wrong, to Putri's point, is where it feels just very high level and top down, and you can't take any individual ownership on it. You know, it really comes down to a really strong communication strategy. Do you have a clear vision? What are your commitments? How does that come to life through the organization? And then being consistent about it too, you know, not changing the ballpark every quarter because, you know, you've got a new initiative. It's about really being solid around, these are the things we want to deliver, and this is what we're doing, and this is how it impacts different parts of the organization.
Yes, and I think communication of the communicating the strategy is one thing, and involving the employees is another thing. So they need to feel that they have a voice to define this strategy. So our 2025 roadmap has been a result of a bottom-up conversations, and we did a lot of workshops with the different champions around the world to get what their feedback of what Danone should drive going forward. Is it still genders? Do we what else can we do as Danone? So that's even the process of involving them. That's already and also communicating that people are involved in this process. And then the people will know that, okay, this KPIs, this strategy doesn't come only from me or from one person or from the CEO. It is from the people for the people. So I think that's also important.
Thank you both. We had an interesting question actually coming also from Eva. She was talking about the public sector actually, and she was telling us that they have different persons working on the diversity topic. So they might have, for instance, a team or someone specific to disability or to gender equality, to family services, to equal opportunities. How would you suggest her to favor a good synergy basically between all of them, and how could we combine these roles and work together effectively? That would be the question.
I am going to be very honest, I don't have that much experience in the public sector, and I'm just reading the question again because I just want to make sure I understand it. In the private sector, you don't generally have kind of equal opportunities office. You have kind of an employment specialist. You often have a well-being specialist. And again, I'm going to come back to the fact that these roles have to be very collaborative. I can't work in my silo and deliver what I need to do for the organization without working through and with other teams. So communications teams are critical. Our health and safety teams are critical. Our workplace and office, you know, setup teams are critical. Our TA people teams are critical. Marketing and branding are critical. So, you know, and again, not having worked with those roles, it's really about saying, this is what I want to prioritize. How does that fit into your priorities? And how do we kind of work together? And where do we have synergies that we can align on, and almost team up a little bit, like, you know, because it's a team effort. It's not, you know, Rachel delivering me the DEI strategy. It's the business, you know, owning it.
Yes, just want to add, in Danone, for example, we have a council So we call it D&I Council. And this D&I Council consists of our different champions in the different functions. So they are represented, each function is represented in this council. And then also our executive committee sponsors, and of course our HR representative, and also marketing and partnership representation. So I think this council, I think building governance probably is the important thing to do. How the topic is being governed in the company or in the public sector, and how each elements is connecting with each other. And I think this governance will drive the process further. So, for example, in this council, we discuss. We are the one who decide, or of course the inputs come from bottom up. But this council is the one who discuss to finalize the strategy, the roadmap, and also to track progress going forward. So I think maybe you can also have this kind of council to basically combine all these different responsibilities into one.
Thank you, Putri. Thank you, Rachel. So, well, I would say we are now getting at the end of the session of the panel discussion. So thank you everyone for joining, and obviously a very special and warm thank you to our two speakers for tonight. We had a funny comment actually in the chat as well. Someone saying that so far the diversity and inclusion officer seems to be a lot of ladies. So I don't know if you wanted to maybe react on this one, and that would be the perfect closure, I would say.
I was going to say, I can think about 5 off the top of my head who are male. And in fact, my predecessor at GE was a male. The person who took over from me is male. McDonald's chief diversity officer is a male. You know, so there's, I think it's again, it's an interesting one, because I think in the HR people teams you do see a lot of females, and I think because this becomes almost like a HR career path, that's probably where you're seeing that pipeline. But I've seen some very, very successful males leading this, and I follow quite a few actually on LinkedIn, which is great.
And it's true that we hear often, like, how do we bring more female in the IT sector? In fact, it should also be, how do we have more men working in human resources management?
Yes.
Yes, Putri, what were you saying?
Yes, I think it links to the fact that this is, in many companies, it falls under HR. If we make it probably like under sales or under operations or under even under the CEO itself, so I don't know, maybe it will attract different talents. So it's a question of where we put the position, and because it's under HR and it's a normal HR career path, even though I myself not coming from HR. And I know many that the D&I professionals are not coming from HR backgrounds. So I think it's an interesting question and interesting observations. Indeed.
Wonderful. So let's conclude the session. And again, I wish you all a wonderful rest of the evening. And I hope that you will be turning back to the recording of the session if you want to hear again the incredible insight that Putri and Rachel gave us tonight. So Putri, Rachel, thank you again very much. And we will be happy to hear from you very soon in the Slack community, for instance.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye. You have now reached the end of October 2021 webinar recording proposed by Munich HR AfterWork. Thank you for your interest in this format and for having watched the replay.